And welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast, and happy Veterans Day to everybody. Today, we are going to do something we've never done before. We're going to review two movies in one episode. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe. Let us know if you agree with our choices or if you have a different movie suggestion for Veterans Day. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and let's dive in. Your moviness, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. Got excited for the weekend and saw a new movie that was pretty interesting. Out of curiosity, how did you hear about the greatest beer run ever?
I was actually it was actually a year ago. I was driving to work and I was listening to 106.5 and they just happened to mention it. And they said, "Oh yeah, it's about this guy who was delivering beer to his friends in Nam." And I was like, "Oh, okay. That sounds fun." And I read a little bit more into it and I was curious to learn that it was based on a true story. So
Yes.
that kind of piqued my interest there. And you and I, we've seen Good Morning Vietnam, and that's also based on it's not necessarily based on a true event, but based on an actual person. So
Yes.
both movies that we're reviewing today are based on actual individuals during the Vietnam War. And
Both
I and
comedies as well.
yeah, exactly. And I was gonna say their approach to humor is quite different, but very individualistic, if that makes any sense. Um, so I rewatched Good Morning Vietnam earlier today just to just to get my feet wet and reacquainted with the whole movie, and I watched the greatest beer run ever last night. You did the same thing. You
Yes.
pretty much followed the same pattern.
We
Um,
did.
w- uh, so um so let's start off with Good Morning Vietnam, just because that's a movie that we're both familiar with. Now this was one of Robin Williams' earlier films. It was made in '87, and it's based on the life of Adrian Cronauer, who actually worked as a radio DJ in South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. Um, and I watched it several years ago, and I rewatched it again when you mentioned it a few months ago when you said you saw it. So it prompted me to watch it, and then this will be the third time that I've seen it. And then the greatest beer run ever. Uh, it, I saw that it was Zac Efron. I thought, it's just him, just doing another hokey character. It's him just, doing whatever. But I was actually impressed with the movie
Yeah.
overall. Like,
Yeah.
I watched it and I was like, damn, this is pretty good.
Yeah.
And can I
Yeah.
say, and can I say, I'm actually glad to see Russell Crowe doing an accent that actually suits him.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew there would be no way to escape having a discussion where Russell Crowe is doing an accent. You don't bring it up. So, but yes, he did. I think that in the greatest beer run ever, right? Zac Efron as Chicky. I think he did a great job with it, right? I mean, I think he kind of hit that kind of those kind of like humor in the way they want to do the humor, right? Is kind of as that I think the humor in Good Morning Vietnam I liked a lot more than the humor in the Greatest Bear Run ever. They definitely attacked it in two different ways that they wanted to do that.
But it worked for them.
Yeah, no, I think
It
yeah,
really did. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think for Good Morning Vietnam, Robin Williams was just doing his stand up, right?
Yeah.
And as
It's pretty much
Cronauer,
Robin Williams in South Vietnam, basically.
yes, exactly, yes, which. Like I said, I think speaks volumes about Robin Williams. And then Zac Efron, I think, and it's a very bizarre premise, right? So the greatest beer run ever, a story about a character named Chicky, right? That is
Dickie
um,
Donahue. Yeah.
bringing, yes, thank you. And he is literally bringing beer to his friends in Vietnam, right? Literally, that's what he's
Yeah.
doing. It's a little beer run, so it is very truthful with that. And I think Efron does do a very strong job of doing that character, and I think the comedy makes sense for that type of story because it is a very bizarre premise, right? Like if someone's like, yeah, this person's doing a beer run to Nam, like I think you do have to have a certain level of how you do the comedy with that because it is such a bizarre premise, right?
Because I mean,
It
it's a
almost
story.
thinks like it was a joke by
Yeah, because
just
it's a
like
story.
hearing
It's a
the
story. Yeah, because it's a story that you don't believe it's real until you actually read
Yes,
about it.
exactly. Yes. So you kind of have to go with a different option with that. Whereas like Robin Williams, I really like how they did the comedy in that more, where the comedy wasn't really it was more just his interactions with people, but then you still had a lot of dramatic elements towards the whole Vietnam conflict going on.
Mhm.
As is like with the greatest bear whenever they kind of like try to intermingle it, and like I said, sometimes it worked, sometimes it just didn't. So I guess it goes to how each of the movies wanted to kind of tackle that angle. But obviously, I think Robin Williams, I mean, just such a fantastic job in that movie. And, I think a lot of us, when you think of Robin Williams, you think of the comedy, but man, could he really, that anger, the intensity, the sadness, like that guy could flat out act.
Right.
And it just, I think, unfortunately, trying to kind of compare the two leads, right? Um, Cronauer with Robin Williams, and then Chicky with Zac Efron. I think Robin Williams really just kind of, does such a fantastic job, and I think just does better than Efron. And that's not a slight against Efron. I think he did great, but I think it just shows how great of an actor Robin Williams was. So
But I mean, you couldn't. But I mean, you couldn't bring that same level to the greatest beer run ever because
no, yes,
because it requires a different level of acting and different level of humor, like you said.
yes, yes,
Um, so for those of y'all who haven't seen the movie, and if you haven't, what the hell's wrong with you? Good Morning Vietnam is basically about real life DJ Adrian Cronauer, who comes to Vietnam to work at the army radio station, and in the movie, his subversive humor kind of gets under the skin of his superiors, namely Dickerson, and throughout the movie, they're really, it, like you said a few minutes ago, it's based more about around his interaction with people than there actually is like a general like story, like act one, act two, act three, like he's kind of he's kind of a man who acts as an everyman. He's kind of thrown to the situation of the chaos of the Vietnam War, and we witness the war through his eyes. Um,
yes,
whereas with Zac Efron, you kind of know like where he's going because he starts off in New York. He makes a plan to go to Vietnam. He goes to Vietnam. He goes through all these different places, and then he comes home. Right. Um, so in Good Morning Vietnam, basically, Cronauer he befriends he tries to make an acquaintance with the lady, and he befriends her brother who helps her out, or who helps him out to try to get to know her. And he um besides being a radio DJ, he teaches English to some Vietnamese people. And then during one attempt to try to go interview the troops, he gets caught in an ambush, and then he gets discharged because the brother of the girl he's trying to be acquainted with turns out to be VC, and he's dishonorably discharged and sent home. Um, I will say this: the humor in Good Morning Vietnam is more on the nose. You know what I mean? It's kind of more in your face. Like when it's humor, it's humor. Like it's
yes,
supposed to be a funny scene. It's kind of
exactly.
like it's kind of like it's kind of like those old sitcoms from like the 80s and 90s where if the audience laughed, you knew it was supposed to be a funny moment. Whereas with Greatest Beer Run, it was more like it's more like one of those comedy shows you see streaming on Netflix or Hulu, where you kind of have to get the feel for the story to know when it's funny. But that isn't to say that that one's funnier than the other. It's just that their approach to the comedy is different. And really it's just based more on the time period, because obviously Good Morning Vietnam was made in the 80s. So so the way that people understood the humor, the cues for humor are going to be more different than what they were in 2022 when Greatest Beer Run was ever made. um so so obviously you and I were introduced to Good Morning Vietnam first. um what what were your overall thoughts on that movie when you watched it?
Yeah, so I think for me, the way I kind of looked at it was, I feel like in subsequent watchings, I just enjoy it more and more. I think it's something that ages very well, and I think number one, Robin Williams, it just absolutely does fantastic with that role. I
Hmm.
know I talked about it very briefly, but I mean, like just his performance, just like with the way he's able to just kind of be very lighthearted at times, but also sinks into some of those incredibly low lows, right? And I think in your synopsis, right, you did a great job of helping describe it. And it's interesting because initially you kind of, see him, his whole purpose for joining the English class, right, to teach the Vietnamese people. The whole point of that was to try to get with, I believe her name was Tin,
Yeah.
was trying to get with, one of the characters, and then almost that whole story, it does kind of play in the background, but more it's the friendship between Robin Williams, Cronauer character, and the girl's brother, Tuan. That ends up being kind of the main fleshed out story, and it is a very very interesting story. I really liked how they did that.
It was a pretty good
Be-
misdirection too, because
oh yes, absolutely. Like you would
because you're
not
because you're thinking the
expect
entire
that.
time he's trying to get, he's trying to, well, not to be vulgar, he's trying to get into her pants, and then he kind of develops a more meaningful relationship with someone else.
Exactly. Yeah, you're not expecting it. It definitely takes a very, a very different change, and you start to see like a lot of that, and even the ending, I think, just has such an impact to it,
Oh, it was so
because
heartfelt.
oh yes, absolutely, because you spend the full movie talking about kind of seeing their relationship and everything, and you see like Robin Williams at the beginning, right, when they go to the GI bar. You see a bunch of soldiers come over and they're harassing Tuan, and he does have a problem, really kind of stepping up for him, right? He wants to show him like, hey, I can help support you, kind of gets to their faces. And I think that's very telling because when that bar gets bombed later, you see him trying to get him out. And I think at the time, while you're not thinking about it, you're like, oh, it was just kind of coincidence that they got out of there. But then as you find out later on, that actually Tuan was the one that was bombing the bar. So him going in there was to ultimately protect Robin Williams.
Hmm.
And I think that just really adds a very different element when you do watch it on multiple viewings, because you start to kind of see some of that stuff. Kind of the same thing where later on in the story, where Robin Williams is in the Jeep with Forrest Whitaker's character.
Garlic,
Um,
yeah,
thank you. Well, sorry, what was the name?
garlic.
Garlic, thank you. Yes, garlic. So, when they're, on the Jeep or whatever, and, really Tuan goes out there and rescues him in, really bad territory, right? Where there's a lot of Viet Cong and everything that's around there. And you actually see our group of people being chased. So, just kind of another instance of him going out of his way to help protect Robin Williams. So, there's a lot of kind of like ulterior motives and everything like that. But I think it does, create this great thing. And, the kind of like the final part where you have that kind of chase scene at the very end, where Robin Williams is trying to confront him. There's just so much power behind everything that's happened. And actually, between Robin Williams and Antoine, they do such a great job of just showing that, for Robin Williams, he looks at it like, hey, we're over here trying to help you guys. And then Tuan's like, maybe not, right? My mom is dead. I believe his older brother is dead. Like he's lost people, he's lost neighbors, he's lost a lot of people in this conflict. So it's one of those things where the war was very gray. And as I said, like both me and you, right? We didn't live during the war, right? I think we're going through it with a different lens. Whereas I think for older generations, right, you have a much firmer mindset of what it is. So I just want to throw that out there that you're talking, you got two people that are just talking about what they've seen through media and other things. We didn't live through these moments that like some people might have, that some people did live through.
Well, to be
But
fair,
just
to be fair, my parents did live in the country next over, so and
oh well, there
yeah.
you go. Right. So got a little bit more probably, firsthand knowledge of some of those things that happen. But yeah, like that's just, something I always found very interesting. But, as I said, with, something like this, there is a lot of gray, right? There's a lot of things that happen. And I think that just goes for any war, right? That there's, unfortunate casualties that happen. And there's, a lot of that stuff that I think doesn't get depicted very well. And I think that, this kind of shows that, Tuan is a very complex character, right? He's somebody that, befriends Robin Williams probably to get closer to America, right? And to be able to do some of the stuff he has maybe planned in his mind. There could be some of that going on from the very get-go that you're
Yeah,
not aware of.
because they were each using one another initially.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So, this easily could have been something that was kind of orchestrated or planned, but it was just something where, he's, doing this bombing, and obviously Robin Williams, was obviously devastated by it. And, I think Tuan to a certain extent is as well. But he's, a younger person that's lashing out at what he feels like the injustices, and that's how he's wanting to deal with it. And it is just I think they just did such a great job of getting so much depth to this character. And, I think he really, has so much. It would be very interesting to see more about Tuan's story. I think that's something that we see bits and pieces of, but, kind of knowing more about the backstory, I think there's a lot that's going on there.
Well, I was gonna say, when you were watching it, today, did you kind of get the feeling that Cronauer was hoping that Tuan would kind of convert to the American way? Like, did you get that feeling? Because in my mind, I was thinking, Cronauer's upset that, yeah, he's been dishonorably discharged because of Tuan, but he's also feeling betrayed. And I think, at least for me, I think the betrayal comes from the fact that he thought Tuan was actually going to root for the Americans. I thought he was actually going to, you become an American himself. And when Tuan, lashes out and says, you guys are causing so much harm to me and my country. It was pretty much like a stab in the back for him, and he felt like a failure because he thought he was getting to him, and it turns out he didn't.
Actually, I'm gonna go the complete opposite. I never really got that impression. I never got that Robin Williams was really, and I think this is probably just Robin Williams and the type of character he plays, but I never really got that strong sense of like patriotism from him. Where I think in The Greatest Beer Run Ever, like Chicky's a lot more, I think, pro Nam, whereas I never really got that feeling with Robin Williams. I just didn't really feel it. I think where all of his emotions were coming from was really a lot more on a personal level, where he was just upset that, he was a friend that betrayed him. I didn't see any of that, America versus Vietnamese type of aspect with it. I thought that it was more just a really straightforward relationship that, he felt betrayed by someone that he was very close to. And that was the reason for the lash on. That was the reason for everything. So at least that's how I perceived it when I watched it. It was more just, this guy that befriended somebody else, and all, skin color, rationale, and everything aside, they were friends, and he had a severe betrayal with what happened.
Right. Well, I mean, another thing too, because because if you watch any of the footage from that period, or if you're watching those documentaries, I mean, obviously during that time period, the White House was trying to portray the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong as the enemy. But like you said, I mean, there are just so many layers to it, because even though Tuan is ostensibly the enemy or the adversary because he's VC, his actions kind of speak otherwise, and in a way you can sort of sympathize with what he's doing. Because
yeah, you can at least understand what he's
Yeah.
doing. I think, like, I could get the rationale. Obviously, the bombings, you're both impacting both, American soldiers, but you're also killing other Vietnamese people. It's kind of like, something I think we see a lot more nowadays. Unfortunately, we see some of that kind of cross casualty that happens.
Right.
But yeah, like you said, like I think I understand his rage, right? I think that's the big thing is I get the rage, and obviously I can't really say I agree with his methods for taking care of things. I can certainly understand a character that has had so much loss, looking for an outlet for their anger, and he chose kind of a very dramatic way, or a very drastic way of going out and showing it.
Now, speaking of antagonists, the big one in the movie is Dickerson because
Yes.
from beginning to end, this I mean there's nothing about him that makes you think, huh, there's I can sort of understand where he's coming from, unlike with Twan, because with Dickerson, I mean, to quote General Taylor, he's just mean.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think he plays that role so well, like totally straight laced. He's 100%. There's a lot of conflict between them because, Dickerson in essence wants to kind of not provide a whole lot of clarity on everything. Like there's some censorship going on with what they want to discuss, right? And he's very, very straight laced with, the type of music that needs to play. So there's like kind of all these things that kind of build up where he's very much the anti Robin Williams or the anti Cronauer, right? Like he's just everything. He despises everything about it. I'm sure he said just as much somewhere in the film. He pretty much despises everything about his character. So I think he does a great job of depicting that. He really is a thorn in Robin Williams' side throughout the full film. And it is, like I said, kind of, I think, very gratifying in the end where he gets moved to Guam, and that's where he's stationed. So at least a little comeuppance there for a guy that not only gave Robin Williams a bad time, but seems to have just just an overall negative rapport with a lot of people.
Yeah, and another thing too, the fact that he intentionally kind of
Oh yeah,
planned that trip. I'm like, yeah, this is a pretty vindictive guy.
yeah.
Like,
Like it gets
he
out
has
of
no saving grace whatsoever at
yeah.
all.
No, absolutely not. Like and that's a great point, right? Like, I think you can have disagreements with people, you could really be annoyed with somebody. But when you start like allowing him to purposely go into an area that you know to be dangerous, that's why I feel like you're definitely crossing the line, right? Because now you're almost I mean, you're in essence you're trying to kill him, right? Like you're not doing it directly, right? But you're indirectly would have caused his death if he was to die because you knew you're putting him into an area that had a lot of VC activity that you knew to be dangerous.
Well, another thing too, another thing that stood out to me was the fact that was that during the time that Cronauer was in there, I mean, obviously he has to deal with censorship, but it's also the fact that he feels like he has an obligation to the truth, and obviously the people at the radio station aren't having any of that. That's kind
Mhm.
of and it kind of contrasts beautifully with what's going on in the greatest beer run ever, where we remember where Chicky's in the bar and he's having an argument with the journalists about about the fact that what they're reporting is not is not helpful to to the soldiers and to the American public, because what they're reporting is pretty much just causing all these major protests
Yeah.
to kind of just say, hey, these soldiers are just a bunch of baby killers and all that stuff. So so it's a pretty huge contrast between these two characters, because one is obsessed with trying to get the truth out and the other one is, well, for lack of a better word, he's trying to suppress it for the sake of morale, you know.
Yes. Hmm.
So so I want to jump to the greatest beer run ever. And we can go back to Good Morning Vietnam in a little bit, but with the greatest beer run ever, for those of y'all who haven't seen it, it came out last year, and it's based on a true story about John Chicky Donahue, who is a merchant marine who makes this bold declaration that he's going to deliver beers to all of his neighborhood buddies in Vietnam, and he gets there and he's going through shit basically, to try to get you know PBRs, and they make it very clear they're Pabst Blue Ribbons
Yes.
to all these to all of his friends, or most of his friends, throughout different parts of Vietnam, and it chronicles his numerous adventures in doing that.
Yeah. The
Um,
movie's a very long PBR commercial.
Pretty much. But if we
uh,
but if we can divorce PBR from the equation, it's I mean it's just as harrowing, and it's just as moving as Good Morning Vietnam. You know,
mm,
you have an issue with that? What do
yeah,
tell?
I'm not gonna go that far. So, and yeah, by the way, did a little bit of research, right? Because you got to make sure you're prepared. So, something that I also found interesting, there was actually a small PBR documentary that's posted on their YouTube channel, for Pabst Blue Ribbon, that kind of has a little bit about the greatest beer run ever.
Mhm.
Thought that was interesting. Just want to throw that out there if anyone was interested in getting more of the story. Um, but yeah, I'm actually going to say that I felt like the biggest difference between what Good Morning Vietnam did and what the Greatest Beer Run ever did was the fact that I didn't get as invested with the story that they were telling in the Greatest Beer Run ever. And I think a lot of that just deals with kind of the storytelling. I guess I'll kind of dive into that. So I think one of my challenges is with the Good Morning Vietnam. I felt like the story was very structured. You got a whole lot of story about Robin Williams, and we see a lot of his interaction with Twan, and that's really where everything kind of revolves with the story. I like how the story was very concise, and it really kept to a very small group of characters. With the Greatest Bear Run ever, I felt like it was all over the place. There was just too many people involved with it, and I get that this is a true story, and I'm going to put air quotes around that because I know the presence is real, but how much we see, I don't know how much of what actually was depicted in the movie was real. But I think you don't really get as much out of the story. It felt more surface level, whereas I felt like with Good Morning Vietnam, it was more in depth. So, with the Greatest Beer Run Ever, he's got all these friends, and it's just like you don't really know the friends, right? You don't really get to see their interactions. So, like when you're seeing the friends, right, you should be excited for that, right? Like when he meets the friends, I'm like, hey, I should be really engaged with this. But the truth is, I'm really not because I never met these characters before. Obviously, they mean a lot to Chicky, and we're rooting for Chicky this whole time. But I don't care about these characters because you never promoted or showed anything with it. Even the character Tommy, who kind of plays, I think, a relatively big role in the film, really his screen presence, I think, was just maybe one or two scenes. Like, I don't think he's in it for more than 2 minutes. Whereas Tommy was, I think Tommy was kind of one of the big reasons that Chicky went over there was because, you find out that Chicky really pushed Tommy to enlist. So he feels a little bit of guilt over Tommy's situation, and unfortunately finding out later on that Tommy was killed in action. So you kind of get the sense that, there's a lot more emotion there, but I think the problem that I have is you don't really see much of Tommy. Like the movie, I think it starts off a little too slow. And I wish they focused less on everything else and more on just one core element, right? Like if you want to talk about Tommy, it would have been a lot more interesting if, he goes to Nam and maybe he meets some friends along the way. And then like maybe at the end is where he's trying to get to Tommy. That's kind of the final goal. And you find out maybe Tommy got killed or, it builds up to that. But like I said, I just never really got invested when he's doing all this stuff. Like when he goes to the really hot area, the really hot LZ, where there's, kind of all this fighting, and he's, kind of had this humorous moment where he's, in one of the places and he's like putting a tarp over himself to hide for his friend that's, running through literally gunfire to get there, kind of has a nice humorous moment there. And, we see kind of this, finally these friends getting together. And the whole time I'm thinking, okay, like, yay, I guess. Like, I didn't really have much of emotional impact. And I think that was the biggest issue I had without the whole thing with the Greatest Beer Run ever was there was too many characters. We never really got to know anybody outside of Chicky. So then you just don't have that much investment, or at least that's the way I view it. I just didn't get that much investment. I think they spread it too thin, and it just make it a weaker story overall.
Well, I mean, what I really, really liked about that movie was the fact that Chicky starts off, you know, I would say as a one-dimensional character, but he's the sort of hawkish, patriotic guy who's like,
Yep.
well, there's a reason why we're in Vietnam, and our government would never lie to us, and all these protesters, you guys are a bunch of shitheads who just want to bring everybody down and have our troops killed. Um, and it, and as he progresses through Vietnam, as he's going through all these journeys, he begins to see the reality of it, and he sees that his friends aren't as emotionally invested in the cause as he would like to be. Now, true, we don't get to see that that much of his friends, but but when it comes to the conflict itself, I mean, there really is no time to kind of just slow down and kind of just think things through, because and I think and I think the movie kind of does a pretty good job in just capturing the fast pace of everything, because yeah, Chicky wants to spend more time with his friends, but obviously he can't, because he's in a situation where people are literally getting killed and blown up all around him, like at LZ Jane, for instance. That I think that's supposed to be like one of the most dangerous parts of the
Yes.
of Vietnam, and there were no flights or anything over there. So by the time he gets back home, and he's sitting at docks, he basically comes to the realization, oh yeah, it's not controlled chaos. It's not a war that our dads and granddads fought. It's just chaos over there.
Yes.
It's that for me, it's that growth and development where he comes to realize, maybe things aren't as black and white. And you kind of see him at the end where he's at the park and he and his sister sit down and they have a beer together. And it's kind of that reconciliation where they come to realize, maybe neither one of us is completely right.
Yeah.
Maybe we have half of the truth. Maybe we're both right to a degree, but we're not completely right. For me, that's what I enjoyed about
Oh
about
yes,
that
yeah,
movie.
and don't get me wrong, right? Chicky's character was really good, right? And exactly for the reasons you mentioned, there is a whole lot of growth within him. So I don't want to dismiss that at all. I totally agree that his development from beginning to end was really strong. And it's exactly for the reasons you said, because it is very chaotic, right? It's not like it's very clear cut. Like you got one people on one side, one people on the other. You got fighting out in the streets. You have the whole sequence where there's I believe it's the Tet Offensive that was depicted.
Yeah.
Where you have all this stuff going on like right there, and that's where we kind of get to see more of Russell Crowe's character. But yeah, like it just really shows the chaos. And I think that's where he sees Hiyu out there, a guy that he had met that kind of build this little bit of rapport with, and he sees him out there. And he's dead, right? A guy that he'd been chatting with and everything like that. And I think it goes to your point that it kind of turns around his mindset and his thinking for it. And he comes back, someone a lot more jaded to really everything that's going on. And there is a lot of unfortunate. The reality is that the reason he sees depictions of soldiers and everyone dead is because that's what's happening every single day. And I think that's a very sobering, for a lack of a better term, a very sobering experience for him in a lot of ways.